Hi, and welcome back to Heimler's History. In this lecture, we get into the Progressive Era, which is an era of great change in American history. Now, the Progressives had many faces and diverse stations in life, but they all agreed on one thing: to use the government as an agent of human welfare. Yes! Alright, let's get to it.
It's time to kick it old school.
So the Progressives had their roots in the Greenback Labor Party of the 1870s and the Populist Party of the 1890s. And as a whole, this movement was very wary of the unrestrained power of capitalism. All of this hands-off, laissez-faire type governing didn't seem to fit in a new industrial age. The Progressives reasoned that a non-interventionist government was fine for the old days of the Jeffersonian farmer. But now things had changed and grown more complex, and there needed to be a government which could change with the times. And so beginning in 1902, there was a whole group of photographers and writers who made an industry out of exposing the evils of this new age, and they became known as the muckrakers. Among the most significant of the muckrakers was Jacob Riis, whose photography of the New York City poor uncovered the grinding conditions in which many of the city's poor lived. And there was also Ida Tarbell, who published a scathing history of Rockefeller's Standard Oil. And perhaps most famous of all was Upton Sinclair, whose expose on the brutal and unsanitary conditions of a Chicago meat processing plant appalled the nation so profoundly, President Roosevelt included, that Congress hastened to pass new legislation including the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. Now, progressivism wasn't only a movement among writers and photographers, it also had a strong political contingent as well. And we can't really talk about all their different political aims and desires, but essentially the progressivists wanted two things. Number one, they wanted to curb corporate monopolies through the agency of the state, and two, improve the common lot of laborers and citizens. And to this end, the progressives were able to pass a constitutional amendment, namely the 17th Amendment. Prior to this, the only members of the federal government who were elected by the people were the House of Representatives. But the 17th Amendment changed that and put the election of senators into the hands of the people. And let's not forget the ladies. Traditionally, as you know, the woman's place in American culture was having babies, raising babies, and making everybody in the family a sandwich. Because the men have important things to do, like, vote and drink prodigious amounts of alcohol. But it's during this age that women start banding together to find the strength enough to tell their men to make their own stinking sandwiches. Most significant during this period was the groundswell of agitation these women caused for the right to vote. Now, the men were not too happy about this, and why would they be, since in their view a woman was just a half-baked version of a man. Now, it wouldn't be until 1920 that women officially had the constitutional right to vote, but it all began here. Now, one significant area of reform that attracted women was factory reform. You'll recall that during this time, many women started working in factories, and they were a good hire for employers because they only had to pay them about a third of what they paid men. Honestly, I don't understand why women are so discontent during this period. Anyway, a couple of very significant court cases were settled in favor of women during this time, including Muller versus Oregon. Now, this case proved the constitutionality of laws protecting women workers on account of they were weaker bodily than men. Now, we have to be careful not to read our current standards of equality and anti-discrimination laws back into this period. If we do, we'll be tempted to wag our finger at all this, but in reality, women felt this was a legal triumph in their favor and a stepping stone to further their goals. The problem with laws, however, is that they mean nothing sitting on the books in some dusty legal depository. No, laws must be enforced, and sadly, many of these new laws which upheld the rights of women were not. Case in point, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City. Now, this factory employed hundreds of women in the garment industry. We already know that factories were dismal places to work, but in addition to all of that, this factory paid no regard for fire safety codes and kept all of its exit doors bolted shut. For what reason, I don't know. Anyway, one night in 1911, a fire broke out in the factory, and hundreds of women working there were trapped inside. And when it became clear that there was no way to escape the fire, many women fled to the windows on the 8th floor and jumped. Here's a first-hand account published in the Milwaukee Journal March 27, 1911. I was walking through Washington Square when a puff of smoke issuing from the factory caught my eye. I reached the building before the alarm was turned in. I saw every feature of the tragedy visible from outside the building. I learned a new sound. A more horrible sound than description can picture. It was the thud of a speeding, living body on a stone sidewalk. Thud, dead. Thud, dead. Thud, dead. Thud, dead. 62 thud deads. I call them that because the sound and the thought of death came to me each time at the same instant. There was plenty of chance to watch them as they came down. The height was 80 feet. I even watched one girl falling, waving her arms, trying to keep her body upright until the very instant she struck the sidewalk. She was trying to balance herself. Then came the thud, then a silent, unmoving pile of clothing and twisted, broken limbs. It would be the worst human disaster New York City would know until September 11th, 2001. And I don't quote this to shock you, although it is shocking. I tell you this to try to move you out of the cold, rational realm of court cases and factory legislation, and to help you feel the horror that these progressives felt, and to help you feel the reason why they agitated for so much new legislation and government intervention. Now there's more to the progressive story, and we'll get to that in the next lecture, but for now, I will see you next time.